Hi. Hi, welcome. This is our last art lecture for the quarter, fall quarter. I'm Shah Osha, and I am coordinating this series. Today, since it's the last, I usually want to thank those that are involved in supporting this and making it happen, because often there's the people that the labor that's invisible we want to try to acknowledge. We have people that help us with space scheduling. We have an administrative person who volunteers time to coordinate with the artist, Julie Ron, and really makes them feel comfortable and sort of orients them to the campus and helps with their honoraria and reimbursement. And then for this particular, and then we have the electronic media interns who are recording these talks, and they then are available to all of us on Evergreen YouTube site, and we have had amazing speakers over the years, and so those are available to us into the future. So I want to thank all of those people. For this particular panel that Gail has put together, it was quite a bit of effort to coordinate and organize a lot of people coming here to speak about the basket making, and it's in coordination with the gallery exhibition right now, Teachings of the Tree People, and that to fund these artists, Tina Kukan-Miller, David McAvity, Yvonne Peterson, the art lecture series, and Gail sort of pooled our resources to bring these artists here. So I'm just going to introduce Gail, who organized this panel. Gail is an emeritus faculty who is we are fortunate to have teaching this quarter, and the first person, I believe, teaching in the new weaving studio. Gail taught English, Native American Studies, Art, and Art History in her tenure at Evergreen, and she joined the faculty in 1981. And she has influenced more than a generation of Native and non-Native students at our college. So, and has brought other panels here that have been really illuminating, and we're very grateful. So thanks, Gail, and I'll let you introduce your panel. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm going to introduce the panelists. The topic of the panel is tradition and innovation in contemporary Native American basket making. And we have today 4 incredibly gifted basket makers who show nationally and internationally their work. Next to me is Jeremy Frey, and Jeremy is from the Passamaquoddy Reservation in Maine, which is the easternmost reservation in the United States. And he has had handed down to him a tradition of making baskets out of ash splint and sweetgrass, and also as part of the Wabanaki Confederacy. He's mastered the art of doing porcupine quill work on birch bark, and tops some of his baskets with some of the most beautiful porcupine quill work I have ever seen. His work is in museum collections. He's in the National Museum of the American Indian, the Herd. The Virginia Museum of Fine Art. The Virginia Museum of Fine Art. The Denver Art Museum has got a piece that they're getting right now. And so his work is out there and important, and his work is well known. Next to him is Theresa Parker. And Theresa is the education curator at the Macaw Museum in Nia Bay, and an expert on Macaw weaving traditions. And her work is in the Burke Museum collection, the Macaw Museum collection, of course, the Michigan State University Museum collection, and which we share. I have a piece there too. So she's a very well-known weaver and artist. And then Joe Feddersen, who's seated there, is an internationally known artist with work in collections at the Munster Museum and in Paris. And he's got work in the Tacoma Art Museum, the Halliford, the Missoula Art Museum, the Museum of Art and Culture in Spokane, the Portland Art Museum, the Seattle Art Museum, and the National Museum of the American Indian. And his work is basically all over the country, and he shows everywhere. And so he knows a lot about art making. He taught at Evergreen for several years, and was an incredible resource for our students. And so he's a faculty who was here and knows the system here well. He also has done a lot to sort of further the contacts that other contemporary Native artists have, and has gotten a lot of us into shows with him, and has been really helpful in that sort of way. And so it's really, he's an important resource, certainly in Washington State, but more broadly across the country. He's a printmaker, a glass worker, a basket maker. I mean, there's not much that Feddersen doesn't do. And if he watches something that's interesting to him, he'll go and just incorporate it into his work in the most fascinating ways. So he's one of those people who's always inventing new ways to do things and new ways to say things with his work. And he has a wonderful sense of humor as well, which is one of the things that most pleases me about some of his baskets, is because I not only enjoy them technically, I get to laugh, and that's really fun. So I really deeply appreciate that about Joe. And so we have 4 people who can talk about tradition and innovation in basket making. Oh, I forgot to mention that Theresa has this amazing piece in our gallery at the moment. So does Joe have amazing pieces. But she has this amazing cedar bark sculpture of a macaw whaler, which is brilliant piece of weaving. And so if you haven't been to the gallery exhibit, you should definitely go, because it's worth it to see everything that is in that exhibit, which includes weavers from New Zealand, Maori weavers, native weavers from Hawaii, and native weavers from the United States, from across the United States. And so the show is just breathtaking. And if you haven't indulged, please do. So I'm going to let Jeremy kick this off and be the first to speak. And then we can sort of move this way, and I'll sort of finish so that if we're running over, you won't have to miss anything from our guests.
So I'm Jeremy Frey. I started weaving in my early 20s just to pass the time originally. My family's done it for generations, but I didn't really start off doing any of it as a child. I barely even... Can we get the photos up? I'll do that. So I barely even saw it. I knew my grandfather did it. I knew some of my aunts and uncles did it, and I'd seen... We had old baskets all around the house, but it was just like a piece of Tupperware or, just something that was there. Is that on? So it's a really old tradition back home. My family's done it for at least 7 generations, and I'm sure it's gone so much further beyond that, but it's it's a fiber, so it does break down, especially in the elements. I've done art my whole life, and well, this is some of the older images. This is a Penobscot boy on the river waiting to go across to the island, the reservation, and I just wanted to show you how some of the piece he has, we call it a utility basket. It's more of a work piece, and it's some of our older designs that go back thousands of years. This one here is a little bit newer, where they started to get more embellished with decoration. And oh, it's cute. So you can see families used to take a collection of baskets like winter work around the state of Maine along the riverways and along the oceanways to sell the basketry, and it developed into more of a smaller, fancier design because you could carry more of them. They could be used inside as decoration as well as used as a functional piece of artwork. And over time, they evolved. You can see all the tiny baskets. That's probably better up there. I'm not sure. But what I'm leading up to is what I do. I go to markets constantly, and I make fancier and fancier baskets as my career goes on, and that's where I get the acknowledgement for it. So I go out and I cut all my own materials, harvest everything. I use black ash. The black ash is being killed off by an invasive insect right now. It's emerald ash borer. And so I have about 10 years left of weaving with this material. And so part of everything that I've done has been to kind of not replace, but find another material to continue my career with when the wood is gone, because it is going to be gone for sure in my lifetime. We use the growth rings, and you can see their thickness. That's a decent tree there. So we pound the rings off the tree, and we use straight fibers, no cross-cutting. You can see I'm pulling it off after I've pounded it. It's an amazing material. I have some here. I probably should have had some to pass around, but I'll be doing a little demo later if anyone that's going to be in there. We hand split it down after it's pounded. And this is one of my first styles of basketry I ever did. My mother's teacher really got this style coming back from the dead back in the 80s, because we lost a lot of our weavers just to the 80s. I mean, I don't know if it was people wanting to work regular jobs, or I don't know what it was, but no youth was learning. A lot of the elders were dying off, and there was just a need to bring it back. And so I was part of an organization that helped take the few elders that were still weaving and bring students to them and encourage the learning of that old weaving. And I came into that as part of that program, and I became a part of the program, and we went around the country, and we had all kinds of fun with that. But my first basket was through that program, my mother had learned these baskets, and she showed me in my 20s. So I don't actually weave my family's style of basketry. My family originally wove utilities mostly. This is called an urchin basket. It's another traditional design we do. We're from the coast of Maine, so. And when I first started weaving, I was a purist. I didn't use anything that I didn't harvest at all. Now I do buy dyes, but everything else I'm still the same way. I'll incorporate new materials that we didn't traditionally use, but it has to be something I've harvested and processed, aside from the dyes. I think the dyes just kind of help make the weave look a little bit more punchy, I guess.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Curious about what is the purpose of the point?
It's all decorative. Yeah, my pieces are mainly decorative. They're strong enough to be used, but they're designed as a decorative kind of thing. And that actually is, it's a weave over a weave is what that is. So you can see there's a black weave behind it. So early on, I tried to perfect what I was doing with weaving before I really tried anything crazy. And this is kind of earlier designs. These aren't the earliest pieces, but this basket, where you weave in on the top, you're weaving into a concentric circle. So if you pull on it, it's going to go in. So it's a really difficult piece to weave. It looks simple, and if you look at the next one, it looks even more simple, which is what I like about it. It's really hard to do, but it looks common almost. I mean, it's beautiful in shape, but it's just, I saw old ones in a shop that I used to sell baskets to, and I always was like, man, someday I want to make one of those. And now that's one of my most made pieces is the urchin basket. A lot of our pieces that are decorative are drawn from the environment. So this is an acorn basket. We have all different kinds of them. And this one has braided cedar bark, which I actually learned from the weavers out here, was trying to use our cedar bark back home after seeing the amazing things that are made out here out of cedar bark. And again, it's a way of trying to find some way to replace the ash when it's gone. I'm just, grabbing at the environment to see what's there and what'll work and what won't work. And I've been working on this for at least 10 years because the emerald ash borer has been around for a while. Those are some more corn bags. Those are full-size corn, too. That was a giant order. Each one of those takes about a week to make, so you can imagine. Tons of fun. I don't like to do piecework like that, but I think that's a beautiful photo. So when I first started doing innovations, I did all the vessel stuff, and I thought, well, I'd like to do something more sculptural, something more of, I've always wanted to just try and make this, over, under, back and forth thing into something more like art. And my first idea was to make a vase-shaped basket. So I made 2 baskets. And the top basket sits in the other one, and it's, it kind of looked like a vase. And then I put it into cedar bark, which takes a long time to braid, so I did the first one. So that's the same idea, but, and it sort of looks like a vase, right? This was even my photo quality is kind of sad there. And then that's more cedar, squat vase. This is my first attempt at going to Santa Fe Indian Market as a competitor. And when I got there, they wouldn't let me enter my work. But the piece was cool.
Can I ask why?
Because I was there as a demonstrator, and no, I wasn't juried in, so you can do it. But I didn't know anything about it. It was a great way to get there and see how big it is and see how easy it is to navigate. Because it was scary coming from Maine to go to a giant, 1,000 artist show, and just to be there, let alone compete. But it also, just knowing I was going, I really pushed hard on this piece. This was probably 3 months in the making. This is another exploration of just what you can do with the wood. And that pretty much speaks for itself. The top's cherry burl. I turned my own molds for some of my forms, for some of my baskets, not all of them. And I figured I'd try turning something that would fit in the piece. So that's actually sandwiched in between the weave. So you can't see it on the inside at all. It's kind of neat. And then the staves come through and they come out the bottom. So they're just they look like they've been poked in there. But again, it's basically the way I've aligned these. It's an exploration. It's basically my little basket life story of different approaches to growing basketry to the next thing. This was my first attempt at making a mock nesting basket, and I just tried to. Well, it's just got a bunch of stuff going on there, but just to see what the material could do. I mean, technically, I think it's really cool. It was kind of ugly in person, just kind of going everywhere. But technically, I loved it, and a collector of mine actually loved it too, and he has it, so it worked out. And then this was what came after that. It was directly based off that. And this piece, the top has braided ash, which is basically, if you break it down, it's braided hardwood. So no one had ever done it, to my knowledge. And at the time, it took so long to make that upper portion. That piece actually got crushed in a house collapse, and they sent it back to me. I took the braided ash off of it and used it again. And you'll see it in another basket. But just because it takes so long, I mean, the rest of the material is straight material, but just flipping that flat ash over like that is hard. That's a little squat version of the same thing. Because when I judged this, because I made this for competition again, and when it was entered, I talked to all the judges that had judged it, and I said, why did it place how it did? What did you think of it technically? And then the one thing they said was it was kind of awkwardly tall on there, so, which I liked about it. But so I ended up bringing that one down, and that one does have a nice presence. But again, you can see it's all based off very traditional designs. Very subtle, just subtle differences make it look so much different than that original point basket, Same piece. So this piece was another story I was trying to tell. We started off with utility baskets, and then we have fancy baskets, and you can use them, but they're supposed to be decorative, and is it craft, is it art, does it matter? I don't know. So what I did with this one was I made a cover on the inside. You can see it in the shadows. I don't know if you can see it that angle. But you can't get it out of that top. You can't use that basket at all, deliberately. It comes off, but it's stuck in there because the opening on the top is actually smaller than the inside cover. And so the whole idea behind that was just to say it's only meant to be looked at. But I still wanted to stay in the realm of a traditional basket. I didn't want to make it into some sculptural. It's just my own view on it. And then this piece is in the Virginia Museum of Fine Art. It's big. I think it's 18 inches across. It's one of my larger pieces. And that middle part is all cedar. So that's natural color. And the bottom is dyed. And the black is dyed. But I do try and use natural color whenever I can. And that has the braided ash that I took off the other basket. It was patinaed, so I dyed it. Just so it would match the piece. This one has a good story. I had a couple that used to come to my table every year in Santa Fe, and they would stay almost the whole day, but they would never buy anything. And I got to know them really well. And one year they come up, and the husband had cancer, and which is why they weren't buying anything. They were saving their money for other things, and he probably wasn't going to make it the year. And he just told me what he thought of my work again, and he said he'd love to buy one, but he didn't. And then he passed away, so I never saw him again. But I remember our conversation. So his wife ordered that. So this is his urn. And I remembered all the pieces he loved the most, and I put them all into one piece. So that one's pretty meaningful. This is another just attempt to use the material in a different way. It's kind of a cage on the outside. I designed that for another artist who does metal work, Pat Pruitt. And so I designed it after his work, kind of like jagged, kind of punk rocker. And then this is another version of the same idea. This is my largest piece ever. And that one was actually supposed to go to the Denver Art Museum, but it sold before I could get it there. Because I entered it in competition, and if you enter, you have to have it available for sale. So, those are 1 foot tiles on the floor, so you can kind of get the idea of the size. And that has some of the quill work. That's not a great picture of my quill work, but we'll get to that. So, all the black uprights are solid wood with a weave all the way over them, and each one of those took about 12 hours to weave. So by the time I got half of them done, I just thought I was kind of crazy for doing that one. I haven't done another one since, but that's a piece of quill work, which doesn't really show up well. Okay, there we go. So that's a porcupine made out of porcupine quills. I don't know if that's insulting or honoring, but it's there. I don't ever kill my porcupines. They're all roadkill. And you can see really clearly how that's just poked through the bark. There's no thread. I use the quill itself to hold the quill in because it's hollow. That's not a traditional way of using quills. We use them on bark, but it's different. Normally it's triangles or patterns or not drawing. But I developed. This was incorporated in my mother. My mother does beadwork, so this is actually her centerpiece on one of my baskets. And I think that one went to Dartmouth. I don't remember for sure, but I just put that in there because she actually got me started on doing the quill work on baskets from one piece she had done years and years ago. I did quills for a long time, and they were just really rudimentary, and I just never. They were on a basket, so it was all about the basket. And then more recently. And I wish I had put one of the older ones on there. I never even thought. More recently, I thought, well, I've kind of done what I can do with baskets, so I should probably bring the quill work up to match the baskets. And so this was one of my attempts at doing something that really looked like it was drawn, And it's tinier and tinier quills and more time. That took me probably 3 weeks to do, and it's only 4 inches across, the whole piece of bark. And then I did the cubs. And that's just being wove onto a piece. That's the basket it went on. I don't know if I have. Just something for scale. This piece is one of my newest kind of brainchilds. It's a double layered basket, and so the inside is completely different from the outside. And I don't think I put another angle on there, but the inside is blue and black and white, and the outside is pretty obvious. But this is the first basket ever that didn't have a cover, and I thought if I put a cover on it, it'd be kind of a cool surprise. But then whoever ends up with it has to open and close the thing 10 times a day, and it'll eventually wear out. So I figured if I made it kind of curve in, it would kind of hide it until you get up and really look in there. So same idea. And it's just more technical than anything. And then I love the color so much, I put it onto this one. Because I mix a lot of my own colors. And that just is what it is, The neck was really the hard part, just making it flow like that. But it comes from, you've seen in all the earlier designs how things are angled. I'm trying to work with the material differently than most people do, and so that was just another way of using the same techniques in a different form. And again, what you're looking at is just over, under, and left to right, so in essence. That's not actually yellow, that's the lighting in my studio. That's the bear, that's moose antler. Just real plain. And that's it. That's my story. So I used to teach classes for a long time. That's really how I learned to weave, was talking about what I was doing with my hands. It made me think about what I was doing. And it made my techniques get better and better just by thinking of exactly why I was moving the way I was, or why I was using what piece of wood, or how I split it, I never realized that teaching teaches you things because you're just putting it into words, which you never would have done before. But as I got busier and busier, I've kind of moved away from that. I just do shows around the country, work at home, garden, harvest my material, and still head down the river in that canoe, I guess. I don't know. That's about how it goes. But that's me. If you guys have any questions, I'll be here.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Theresa Parker. I'm Macaw and Lummi. When Gail invited me over for this, I'd done a lot of thinking about traditions and also innovation. And boy, everything that came back. As you'll see on here, I'm from Nia Bay, and we live on a little bit of 44 square mile reservation. For folks that don't know, you'll see in the green, we're right on the very northwest tip. Pacific on one side, Straits of Juan de Fuca on the other. And we're pretty blessed at home to have quite a number of weavers. But who was really instrumental with me was my mom and my dad. My mother's name was Leah Smith Parker, and my father was David Ty Parker. And on each of my sides, I had grandmas that wove, and they taught a lot of folks in our community. So I was really blessed to be able to be taught by folks that they taught. And one of the things that my father, he always brought us down to Ozette. And our folks, we did about 11 years excavation of Ozette, and we brought back a little over 55,000 pieces that came out of Ozette, and about 1% is out on our floor. And so getting to look at that in all the aspects of our people is really what done for me in my weaving, because everything you've seen cedar everywhere. And me, I love to have cedar with me. As you see, bracelets, everything's, it is about cedar for me. And anyway, when I was thinking about exactly how my weaving started, it was my grandmother. Long ago, you'll see in one of the clips, there's a 25-cent piece. Well, when I was young, at it's called Washburn's General Store, all our weavers used to weave small baskets about the size of your hand, about the width and the length of your hand. But what they would do is they would get a quarter for that basket in trade of food or whatever their needs were at that time. Well, that's how my grandma started teaching me to weave. And I remember as early as 5 years old, because my brother Billy, it might have been even sooner than 5, but I remember 5 because my brother Billy had gone to school, and I used to run to school to go look for him, and they'd have to bring me back. But they brought me back to my grandmother, and she started making me do mats. And the mats are the bottoms and the foundation of your basket. And so when I would do that, I didn't catch on as easy as I'm the youngest of 6, and all of our folks weave in our family, and from nieces to great nieces. And anyway, she showed us gathering. Gathering was real important. Matter of fact, you weren't able to weave unless you could gather. And so that was an important step. And so when you, why I got asked to come here was because of this whaler doll that I did. I've done almost 2 handfuls of them that are quite spread everywhere. I had to show this picture of my 2 best friends, Elaine Grinnell and Dolly Lansdowne, because because he's anatomically correct. Well, on macaw days, we get thousands of people. And these girls, they're so hilarious. They're 2 good partners, boy, when they were walking by and they say, "Teresa, you put it out?" And it was like, well, yes, and then so they're kind of walking by and they're just kind of looking. I said, "Just stop, come over." And they were, Elaine's 82 now, and this was probably 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And their conversation back and forth was just hilarious. Well, how this doll came about is, I must have been about 29. I was sitting with 3 of our grannies, and I knew it was going to be kind of a hard thing because they were in their 80s and 90s at the time. 70s and 80s. And then I asked them, and I said, "Has anybody done any weaving of," I said, "you'll see carvings of grannies with breasts and, on poles and stuff." I said, "Have you seen anything with a penis?" And oh my gosh, that Margaret would not even look at me. I said, "Well, okay, sorry." So I went to the next sister, and they said, "Teresa," and see, I'm their relatives, and so that frown, it was like, well, I just needed to know, She says, "No," and they're both shaking their heads at me, and it's like, well, I know what I'm doing. And it's not going to be, and that's how that came about. But visiting with those grannies was awesome, because they'd always talk about their own innovation that they'd done in their time, because they were talking about raffia and how that came in on the trade time, and then ryegrass and how that was introduced, and so things that they would make themselves and do. It was just a wonderful process to see them. And then it made me think about our people in all the generations of what they've done. There was always somebody doing something different, something new. And then so to see that, because I seen old photograph, because I like to wear cedar, so I'll make anklets. But I seen a picture, and it was in the late 1800s, and there was a granny with a piece of cedar on her ankle, and I thought, oh, cool, that they do, the time that they have during the day, not much light when it gets to be in the wintertime, just what they think about and what they're doing. Yeah, amazing. Always good to go visit the family. These are some whalers' hats that I've done. I was visiting with Jeremy a little bit ago. There's one over in the British Museum. It has a removable top. And I didn't get to pick it up and touch it, but I know I'm going to be able to make it. It is a beautiful piece. And so these, you'll see some of the designs on here. A lot are we have family designs, but then there's designs that we create ourselves. And then had to show this because my son, his name is Reb, and this is my grandchildren. I have two granddaughters. Oldest is 13 now, and the youngest is 9. And their mama just passed away in 2014. And so they moved back home from Oklahoma. And so what they're going to do is 2 years at home here and 2 years at their home there. And well, Reb, he was brought up with art, you know, and it was every day. And so I really felt that it was important because he started doing bone work and he does real good finishing work on his pieces. I just love that. So I'd always bring him around to other artists, and I stopped at one of his cousins, his uncle really, and I said, well, is there anything that you can show Reb? You know, I want him to visit as many artists that he can. And he said, Theresa, I can't show him, you know, anything. And I'm just real proud of my son for doing that because he's like you. He thinks about things and, I might try that, you know? And I remember when Jeremy first started coming out, I went to Amoeba at a gathering, which is the main Indian Basket Weavers Alliance. And I sit on the board of NANABA. And anyway, we did a program together, seeing his work. Oh, knew that he was going to be dynamite. And yeah, his pieces, you could just tell. Even because I think you were 24 at that time. And it was like, oh my gosh, you know, heaven. And that's what, you know, all weavers and people like to see, that artistry that folks have at that early age. Yeah, because then you know it's just going to go on. Yeah. This is my grandbaby, Cameron. When she first comes home, she's in it would be the far top right. And every opportunity that we have, we teach our kids about their resources, what they have. And it was, we were out fishing the river that time. Real beautiful day out. And anyway, I was telling her, you know, sis, you know, we got to take care of things. This is ours, you know. And if we just look at it and bypass it, it's going to build up. You got to take care of it. Well, she's seen something in the water, in the river. Well, she's going to go. Well, it was like, okay, now let's not go too far. But she was, and she's starting to pull things up and out. We were finding beach glass, and that's what her mama loved the most. Man, she could find beach glass everywhere on our, it was funny, because on Front Street of where we have, Vanessa would go down there, and at our elders building, elders would be watching what she's doing and such, and one of them came to me and they said, what is she looking for down there? And I said, oh gosh, she comes home with beach glass like crazy, and we're teaching the kids to do artwork with it. And they said, on our front beach? And it was like, I know, every time I go out there, I can't find it. And she just had an eye. And I mean, she had like gallons of glass. And so putting our kids to work with that, getting them to be comfortable with whatever our resources are, you know, and make the best of it, you know. And so anyway, we, our kids, we, try to teach them as much as they can, and to be conscious about their surroundings. These are some of the dolls that I like to do. I do a lot of teaching, and so you're not going to see a whole lot of mine. I had to show this grandma. Oh gosh, she was up from Bella Bella. She's in the top right. We were sharing about traditional foods and stuff, and I was saying, oh, I just love sea eggs, and she says, oh, me too, and her name is Evelyn Windsor, and she's a language teacher there, and it was really funny because after all our classes would get over, folks had come up and say, I never seen Evelyn act like that. I mean, her and I had so much fun during the day because we were talking about sea eggs. And I said, you know, that might be a nice doll to be making. So, well, she came up and she says, well, Theresa, you got your model, you know, and she's showing me and with it down like this. And yeah, I went home and I made me one. And it went off over to down to Phoenix is where that one went to. Yeah, Evelyn, she was so funny. I always brought my grandchildren. These are my step-grandchildren. I hate saying that because they're my children. They belong to me. And they live in the city. And so anytime I get them out, you guys hit the beach, you know, let's go out into the woods. We're going somewhere. Well, we went out and made kelp cars this day. And I was telling them, you know, you don't have to have much. Just, you know, got your hands, that's good enough. Show you how. And anyway, Ben, who's my oldest grandson, he wanted to go swimming. And he says, Grandma, I'm going to go out in the water. And I said, okay, fine. Comes back and has this bullwhip kelp. And, well, we talked about bullwhip kelp and what it could be used for. And he was saying, well, I'm just going to be one of your dolls. And I said, yes, you are. And so used bullwhip kelp and eelgrass on one. And, yeah, so just a lot of different things that it inspired. Also, just to use our traditional materials. I put this up because on the right middle, that's my namesake, Theresa. I started having her do lectures at our museum from the time she was 10. She got to come with me for a year, and then by 10, she was able to do lectures for folks. But what I liked is that when they had the Smithsonian's 40th annual, I think it was 30 of Nanaba's weavers got chosen to go, and Theresa was one of them. So there was Theresa, my sister on the far left, June, and then myself. And the girl in the middle, that's my niece, Julie. I love it. That girl can make designs like something. Me, every time I make a design, I'll pattern it out and weave it and redo it. And Julie, she sees it, just sees it, and it's perfect every time. It's amazing, yeah. And so you'll see some of her designs there. And as I told you about the quarter basket a little bit ago, it's amazing that our folks got a quarter for their baskets. But you know what? Put food on the table. That's really what it was about. This piece here went to my cousin Dale Johnson. He serves our community in so many ways that it's unbelievable. And he pretty much has everything, but I knew he didn't have one of these. So I thought, I've been trying to think of what I could make him. And he'd walk by it and he'd look at it and he'd stop and he'd walk again. It was this over macaw days. He walked by it about 4 times. And I thought, that is what I get to give him, because I wanted it to be something that he would use, and he does. So it's nice to know that. Yeah. Well, we've always been involved with Evergreen. Geez, since before its inception, we've Macaw's been with us, and this was our last visit with Maori weaver Carl Leonard. He came out and he did demonstrations and weaving with us and such. And I was always grateful that Evergreen provides this to our communities, because not everybody gets to come, and travel. And so to have that opportunity and exposure and being able to share like that is great. So just like to thank everybody. And have a good day.
Well, I'm Joe Feddersen. I taught here for 20 years. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. And I've been retired for about 10 years. So that means like 30 years ago, I got to teach with Marilyn Frasca. Marilyn's down here. She was my first teaching partner. So she showed me the ropes back then. That's over about 30 years ago now. So I really appreciate that. And she's really a wonderful person to teach with. I really enjoyed my time here at Evergreen. And let me go on to this first. But I grew up in Central Washington, and as you can see, Omak is in red, and it's near the Canadian border. It's in the middle of the plateau area. And I wanted to talk a little bit about being plateau. A lot of times plateau artwork is overlooked. And you think about, well, how did plateau work influence the world? And I was looking through the Tiffany book on influences for Tiffany artwork, and he showed this whole collection of works from the plateau that influenced some of the geometric designs of the Tiffany glass. And when I came back to Evergreen, I wanted to do work that was about home, but also about my artwork and my process. These are a lot of just the normal kind of root baskets. I became interested in the basketry because when I came back to Evergreen, I wanted to do something that was about home, but also something that was about the process, something about making things in multiples and the overlaying of printmaking. And I started a suite called Plateau Geometrics. And it was this suite of works that led me to basket work. They were based on the baskets, but I thought that maybe I should learn how to make one. And it was really, I was really lucky that Elizabeth Woody was just learning how to make baskets, and Elizabeth taught me how to twine baskets. And that was over 20 years ago. When I was doing the baskets, I didn't want to recreate other baskets, but I wanted to do baskets that were about the world around me. And a lot of times when you listen to the stories about the creations of baskets and the tree with the young girl, the tree tells the young girl to go out there and to use abstract designs of her world around her. And so when I do these works, these are kind of like little parts of my world, I guess. And so you see like the chain link design and the cul-de-sac design and parking lot. It was when, you guys probably don't know Vi Hilbert, but she was one of our Skagit elders, and And she looked at me one time and she says, "Joe, I didn't know your work was funny." And I did one called a tire track design. And I did a show that was at the Smithsonian at the Hyde Center in New York. And I had these small baskets blown up in glass. And these baskets reference that first one, which was a stereotypical tire track. And I thought I should do ones that are specific. And it brought me into a realm of this relationship between these names of these things that make marks on our landscape. And the names are things like Eagle and Open Country and Rugged Trail. These are the names of the tire track designs. Firehawk. I can't read. I think that says Winter Forest. And so you see the tracks in the land and on the pieces. I think that's wilderness. And so these were using the twined cylinder form and using that same traditional form, but using contemporary iconography to talk about the land. This one is called Eagle, and it was made at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, and it's referencing a tire track design. And this one's called Rugged Trail. When I did the residency at the Glass Museum, it's really boring to see somebody sitting there and putting stencils on the glass. Well, so what they did was they made these blanks for me, and then we carved through the blanks, and you can see the kind of like sharp lines. And we carved in the designs, and then they picked that up and then blew it out into the shape. And this is a pretty good sized piece. It's probably about 20 inches across and maybe 24 inches high. Some of the other ones were a highway with HOV lane. It's another parking lot. I made these pieces where I blew them, I had them blown in clear and I mirrored and put the pattern onto them. And so these have one of the ones in the front is clear cut, and I can't. And you can see one with a parking lot design. So I wanted to do something that was about kind of like Art Deco, and Art Deco referenced native artwork, and I wanted to do these things that referenced Art Deco. This is up above, looking down into them. I wanted to do work that told stories about things that go on in the community. And I started a suite called Canoe Journey, which is it's about positive things that happen in the community, gathering people together to have community events that aren't just based on commerce. And so these are little. This is a little root bag with different people in it, including like a flat screen television and a little chief and a little killer whale and so forth. And I made this one we had this event last year where for 5 of our weavers showed about 30 some young people how to make baskets. And what we ended up doing is we wanted to make enough baskets so that we would have root bags for the root feast in the spring. And so we started in February, and we showed 30 people how to make baskets, and we're talking about doing that again next year. The thing about basket making is it's really wonderful to have this communication with others, and it's kind of like a building of community. you're not working by yourself. You work with a lot of other people, and a lot of times the thing about being together and having community is really important for this. So I guess that's the end of my slides.
Okay, I'm going to show you 4 images of some of my larger film baskets. Originally, I started making film baskets when I taught with Marge Brown, who taught filmmaking and animation here years ago. She was a staff person in media who taught a program in evening and weekend studies on animation and had many incredible students. And one year I was scheduled to teach with Barbara Hammer a film class called Hand in Hand, Third World and Feminist Film Theory and Practice. And Barbara decided that she was going to do something else. And so Marge and I ended up team teaching together. And it was a wonderful, diverse class of students, some of whom have gone on to be very famous and program native films for Sundance and make films on Trudel and my student Marilyn Abink, who's Dutch Indonesian, made a film about people in the gay games in Vancouver, gay people in various non-stereotypical images that were wonderful. And Kitty Choi was in that film, which was really fun. And so Marge and I worked together and had a marvelous time. And I mostly talked about film theory and about the work of people of color in film internationally, which I'm really interested in and have studied a fair amount about. And so during winter quarter, Marge suggested that I should make a film project. I like editing film and video a lot, and I put together edited film and video for installation work all the time. But I hate shooting any kind of camera at all, and I'm quite happy to write scripts and to direct and do anything. But I trained in drama in my undergraduate years. So there's a lot of things I know about that relate to the film industry, but I'm not a filmmaker. And so Marge said, you ought to do a film project. And so during spring quarter, I asked students for outtakes from the films that they were making for class. And so I got all this full code, and because we were working on the moviola, and those were the old days, right, when you actually shot film and didn't edit on video. So we were working on the Steenbeck and the moviola, and so I was getting all this footage of full code for sound recording and outtakes from films that weren't going to go into the films. And I wove a basket with it, with a fancy stitch on it. And at the end of spring quarter, I handed it to Marge and said, here's my film project. And so she had my film project. And I found that the material was really interesting. I was miles from home and my usual materials. And so I said, this is going to work. And what can I say with this, And so I began making film baskets. I started with square ones, and then I moved to round ones, and I did various things. I didn't want to cut or shave the film to make weird shapes, so I made mostly cylinders and cubes, but that was what I did. This, and then I had to find footage that I thought was interesting. And I had to start thinking about how to play with language in the titles. So this basket is called Since High School, My Most Wanted has been to see roles for red leaders among all the images of blacks and whites on the silver screen. Okay, and so that red is leader, film leader for a 35 millimeter film. And the film society in town used to give me all their broken trailers of 35 millimeter film, so I could get 35 millimeter film. And they gave me a film called Most Wanted, and they gave me a film called High School, and I wove them together and put that in the title. So that's where that comes from. And this film is a film I wove out of films I got from, right now libraries are decommissioning all their 16 millimeter films. And they're replacing them with DVDs because it's easier to store and has less wear and et cetera and so forth. So Feddersen bought me films from the Tacoma library, and when the library at Evergreen started to decommission films, Jane Fisher, who ran the film library, said, "You want all these films? If you make me a couple of film baskets, I'll give them to you." So I have 400 films from, all kinds of ethnographic films and all kinds of other stuff. And I happen to have this film about, this cartoon film about Israeli Jewish history, and this film called Arab Identity. And during the madness of one of those wars in Gaza, when they were leveling everybody's house and killing people and letting them die in the streets because they wouldn't let the ambulances in. And I was listening to the news and going, I was just so upset. Because, it's something far away and you can't fix it. So I wove those two films together. And this film is called An Iroquois Dreams That the Tribes of the Middle East Will Take the Message of the Ganawida to heart and make peace. Because, we Iroquois people used to fight one another all the time. We were pretty awful. We fought over everything, hunting, just everything. And then the peacemaker came to us, and he and Iawenta went from one place to another, and they talked to people, and they got Jagonsase's support. She was the person who kept all of the food stores, and if someone wanted to go to war, they had to come to her to get supplies to take with them. And so we became a confederacy. Like the Wabanaki Confederacy, we became a confederacy on my grandfather's side. My mother's side, my grandmother's side, is Mi'kmaq, and so that's the connection that Jeremy and I have. We belong to the same confederacy on my grandmother's side. And so I get those kind of ash splint curly stitches from both sides of my family. And so I made this piece, and it went to a museum in New York who wanted to buy one of my pieces, and it stayed there and it stayed there, and they didn't buy it and they didn't buy it. And then I discovered that the problem was there was some Jewish person on the board who was upset with the title and the fact that I was talking about Jewish things. And so it came home. And then the Watcom Museum in Bellingham bought it. So it's now got a home. And they had it in their show of women artists in Washington that they did, and they bought the basket. The high school basket is in the Portland Art Museum in a collection of work that is Lillian Pitt and her friends. And there's Feddersen baskets in that collection too. Okay, this one is called "It Was Never About Playing Cowboys and Indians." It's 16 millimeter film, red, white, and blue leader, silver yarn and braid, and it's on a plexi core so that it will stand at 2 feet, because film is pretty stable. I mean, the one in the gallery, which is probably about 2 feet high, doesn't have a plexi core, but if you touch it, it'll wobble. And you can't touch it because it's got a case, but if you did, it would. And so I started weaving them on plexi cores to make sure they were stable. And this piece was done in 2012 for a show called Changing Hands, Art Without Reservation 3. I think that's what it was.
Was it 3? What was it 3?
It was 3, because I think 1 was southwest and 2 was northwest, and we were 3. Yeah. And it was all of the people in Canada and the US who were east. And so, and it's funny because when they did the northwest one, Lillian kept insisting I should be in that show because I was living in Washington. And I said, no, Lillian, I should not be in that show. I come from the east, and I should be in the show with my people. And so it was funny. But I've shown a lot here, obviously, because I live here and teach here. So this piece is a film called Play in Cultural Context, Montana Indian Children. And it's a sociological film that's part of a series of films about play. And so I made this basket. And of course, for Indian kids, it's never about cowboys and playing cowboys and Indians. And so that's what this, and it shows kids playing with dolls and cradle boards and, doing different things that maintain their cultural traditions. And some of the things that they're doing, like, dancing and powwows and stuff, I wouldn't even call play. That's not play to me. But to the filmmakers, it was play. And so, but I wanted to sort of celebrate the fact that Indian kids play in ways that actually teaches them about their own cultures and helps them to maintain their cultures. And that was very important to me to do. And this piece is currently in the Denver Art Museum collection. And then this piece is called Deconstructing the Anthropological Narrative Celebrating Indigenous Images. And this is a film about fishing at a stone weir, and another film called Caribou Hunting about Native people in Alaska. And the texts of these things sometimes, when they're in English, are pretty bizarre. And the images, however, are Native people living in traditional ways. And so by cutting the film apart, I was deconstructing the anthropological narrative and celebrating Indigenous images. And so this was done in 2013, and this was bought bought by the community college system for part of their public art. And I'm not sure which, I want to say it might be in Hood. I can't remember which Portland Community College this basket is in now. So that's my work. I want to show you very quickly work that I'm not going to talk about, but I've given you a handout about for Shan Gorshan, who's another highly innovative indigenous basket maker. She's Eastern Cherokee and currently lives in Oklahoma. And this piece is about, it's called Cause and Effect, and it's about boarding school. And this is what the children looked like when they arrived at boarding school. And she has a long artist statement in the handout that those of you who wanted it picked up. And this is them after they had their hair cut and were put in military uniforms. And there's text in this where she talks about things. Shan talks about how, as an artist, her work was always very political. She was a printmaker and photographer, and it was always very political, and people were always being upset with it. But when she started making baskets, the art form attracted viewers because of the technical complexity of it. And that they began to be able to receive what she was talking about with more curiosity and openness. And I thought that was a very interesting thing when she said that. I found that totally fascinating. And this piece is a basket called Fire Within, and it's a really wonderful basket. Okay. And this is a Lisa Telford piece made out of cedar bark, cotton cordage, and faux leather fringe, and it's called the Pocahontas dress. It's a copy of the dress in the Pocahontas movie in cedar bark. And so she's claiming glamour, if you will, for the Haida women. And this piece is called Summer Night Dew, and this is pounded red cedar bark, cotton cord, vintage mother of pearl buttons and feathers. And I think this is a brilliant piece of work, just amazing. And I like the way that her work plays with glamour and women's images. I find that that's very satisfying to me. This one is called Night on the Village, and it's a bustier. And the top is edged with guinea hen feathers, which I think is very sensuous and beautiful. And but when you think about, what rock and rollers are wearing today, and you think about claiming it for yourself in cedar bark, it's really fun. And this one is called Two Haida, and they're these insanely high heels. And then this one is another bustier woven in natural and dyed cedar bark, and it's really beautiful. So that's Lisa's work. I would have liked to have shown you a film of Terrell's, but we don't have time. Terrell was supposed to be here today, and he unfortunately missed his plane yesterday. But if you go on YouTube and type in Terrell Dew Johnson, you can watch this really wonderful video about his work with Toka, which supports basket makers on his res. His work, his series of baskets that are based on computer algorithms, and also his work with natural foods and trying to lower the diabetes rate on his reds, because of course, when you stop eating native foods, oftentimes your health is very negatively affected by that. And his res has a 40% diabetes rate, and so trying to think about how you feed your younger generation so that unlike the older generation, they're not all suffering from diabetes and dying much too young, is really important. And so he does incredible work as a basket maker, as a community organizer, as a human being in the world. And he's shown everywhere and is just a marvelous artist. So I highly recommend you search out the YouTube video about his work, because you will enjoy it. So, questions? Do you have questions?
I'll start with that one. That's come up for me. That's come up for me several times. When I was with the Basket Makers Alliance, it was in our policy that we taught natives only, just because that was our goal, was to bring it back to the tribal members. So we didn't sell materials to non-natives, and we didn't teach. And so for me, you know, I started off that way because I was teaching students regularly with the Basket Makers Alliance, and I just maintained the policy because it was there, even when I did my own teachings. And now when I teach, I only really have enough time for tribal youth. So even, you know, it's just prioritizing time more than anything. But originally it was just because we were developing a market as well as developing students. And so if we were teaching everyone, it would just kind of, you know, I mean, that's my long and short of it.
I've been teaching, I'm 62 and I started teaching outside our community when I was about 18. And I did neighboring tribes and got into the same thing about non-tribal members weaving. And I went back and I visited our elders about it because they're the ones that gave me the gift. You know, I wanted to honor them, and I wanted to, and the three sisters, they said, well, you know, Theresa, the oldest one, she says, you know, weaving's universal. And it was like, yeah. And they said, well, you know, people are gonna weave, you know, once they weave, they're gonna wanna weave. And so how I do it is I sit and I interview them. I interview people, and because if it's gonna be a fly-by-night, I'm sorry, I don't have that time to invest. I wanna invest in folks that are serious about it, because I have my second to the oldest daughter, she was married to a non-tribal member. He was very interested, and I taught him to weave because at that time my daughter wasn't interested, but I had grandbabies, and I thought, somebody's gonna teach him. If I'm not here, somebody's gonna teach him, and who better than their parent? And so sitting on the board of NANABA, you know, we have little over 600 membership, and there's tribal and non-tribal, there's voting and non-voting. And you'll see that there's an interest, and I think just for my own self, not for, I do. I sit and I visit the person and I see what they're going to use it as. Because if it's for commercial purposes, that, they can go anywhere and learn, yeah. Because YouTube and on that, holy, I couldn't believe what you can learn on there. It's like, wow, all kinds of art and gives you ideas. Yeah, it's cool, but yeah. But it's changed from in my 20s. It was like, oh, no, home, I teach at home. As I got older, it's changed, how I feel about it. I'm just glad everybody wants to be weaving.
For me, when we did the project last year, where we brought in the people to make the root baskets, our Native people were, the reason we did that, and it was, and we reached out to them with, a really great response. Some non-natives were in the group, and we just let them join the rest. So I guess that's my response for you for the thing.
And you know pretty well what my positions are because you're in my class. But for the other people who are interested, I think that I'm willing to teach techniques, but not all of them. But I'm not willing to teach gathering materials very much, and particularly not materials that belong to other tribes. I feel like that's something that every people has to decide. I also don't want people copying other people's designs and not understanding what they're looking at and what's important and sometimes what's sacred, what's good for the things that you're using the basket for. And baskets are used for all kinds of things. I'd rather that my students learn to do their own designs and that they can use a technique, because I think that techniques are used in lots of different cultures. And I know lots of techniques of weaving used by non-native people, because I've been studying weaving for 50 years, And so I've sat with weavers from all over the world and learned different kinds of things about weaving. And so I've learned how to take designs and move them between different kinds of tools. So I know how to weave something on a 2-bar loom, on a warp-weighted loom, twining, on a 4-harness loom, on a, so that I can move things from one kind of equipment to the other. So as a weaver, I have a lot of skills to move between weaving traditions and also to find things that are relevant to my students' background and to encourage them to do designs that are their own rather than appropriating native designs. And I always tell my students, it's not okay to copy somebody else's intellectual property and try to sell it. This is not okay. And so, and my students have been very good about that. They don't do that. They understand how important it is as an artist to have their own voice and to not borrow, And what is amazing about the people in this panel is that each of them comes from a tradition that is really rich and important and develops their own voice as an artist and has things to say that in some ways relate to a very long history in their community and yet is highly innovative. And I think that that's what artists do, right? I mean, we make things that are absolutely traditional when we need them for something that we're doing. You know, if we need a certain kind of cape for a ceremony or a certain kind of basket to put the messages in, because when we replace the white dog ceremony with putting the messages to the creator in a basket and burning the basket, right? You build that kind of a basket, you know, and you don't mess with those traditional things that are used inside your culture. But you have, when you're, you know, hitting the art market, you have the ability to develop whatever vision you have as a weaver, as a maker of objects, as somebody who knows how to use material and cares about material and is pushing the possibility for what material can do as far as they can and be as inventive as they can. And so I think that as a teacher, to me, it's important to allow people to develop their own voice, but I don't mind teaching them to twine or to weave a tapestry, you know, or to weave a twill weave or to weave, you know, and all of those are used by native weavers in different places in the country, right? And I think that there's something important about learning how complicated it is to make things. I mean, when you look at native art, if you have gotten your hands on the technique and you know how long it takes, you don't look at it in the same way. I mean, I've seen people look at beadwork and want to buy it for, you know, I mean, I've seen people look at baskets, 25 cents. No. That's an investment. And when I'm asked, how long does it take to make a basket? I always tell them it depends where you want to start. If you want to start by going out and gathering your materials and processing them and doing all that work before you even begin to weave the basket, and then you invent something that takes you hours to weave, you know, that thing is worth.
Now you're talking about the time it took to develop the technique.
Yeah, that's right.
That's also time that's involved.
It is. And so, you know, you always have to understand that when you're looking at something, it's worth a huge investment in somebody's life. And they become, you know, expert at it. It's not something that's dashed out. And someone who thinks that major works of Native American art are not worth anything has never made anything in that kind of tradition. And I think it's important for people to know how much work it is and how hard it is. And all of you in my class are learning, you know, I want to make a big one, right? 6 months later, you can have credit in a big one, right? I'm only teaching 10 weeks, you know? And so you have to think about scale. Yes. Are you raising your hand? No. Yeah. Not only made Native American symbols, but Native American objects.
There's a law against it. It's how much it's been misused. So, I saw one of our baskets on a news program that was furnished by some Japanese company that mass produced. I think it was, I don't know if it was on IKEA, but it was one of those companies. And it was a point basket made over in China for like 10 cents. But that's the same idea, of who you're teaching and why you interview them. Because, I mean, this guy probably bought a piece from one of our shows in Maine, because it looked just like the stuff we sell. Brought it home, they deconstructed it, they mass produced it. And so, I mean, take that how you will, but.
And then there's more terrible uses. My grandfather's people make husk faces to dance at midwinter. And for a while, people sold husk face to tourists. They weren't. The ones we used, they didn't have tobacco ties in their hair and they weren't fed, right? They weren't cared for in the same way. But there was some group of people in Arizona who bought these husk faces and started holding fake ceremonies. And people at home stopped selling husk faces over that. It was so upsetting to everybody. So there are things that have happened that are nuts and don't make sense. And you shouldn't be messing with other people's objects that you don't understand. That's dangerous. And it's upsetting to people. It's like in the Northwest, around here, there are many people who are buried with baskets and other goods. And people have been digging up graves at Nisqually to steal the baskets out of those graves. The kinds of things that happen are so horrifying sometimes that you can't understand how somebody could possibly think about doing something like that. It's really difficult. And baskets, I mean, in European culture, there's something called the art-craft divide. And if something is functional, it's called a craft, even if it's brilliantly designed. And if something is not functional, it's called fine art. In Native culture, all beautiful objects are considered to be aesthetically rich and important. Even in nations that don't have the word art, we still have a way to judge those brilliantly designed objects that we care about so much and that we see as our wealth. And many of those objects have cultural meaning to them. And Feddersen's pieces often have stories, coyote stories and other stories associated with them that are really delightful. Sometimes he's got puns in his titles that make me just fall out and laugh. And yet he's working from a tradition that has used marks and designs in basketry that relate to landscape and all kinds of things that are really culturally important. And most of us have these relationships, with the circle of things that support our lives, and we care very deeply about them. Theresa talking about taking care of the water in the river, that stuff is really important to us, And so I think it's very important to think about the way in which we interact with objects and to think about objects as part of our cultural wealth and the beauty that we put into the world. And sometimes the way we talk about our connections to things that are very deep and spiritual and important to us. And you don't trespass on that stuff. I think it's really important for you not to trespass on that stuff.
Seems like a good note to end on, if that's okay with the panel.
Oh, yeah.
All right, thank you again.